Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. Your picture should show me in just a few minutes, and I'm going to take this opportunity to say a few hellos to a few people that are already in the room. So I'm excited. Everything should be working correctly, but I will end up checking that in just a second. And we will see. There we are. There I am. There are a few people right now in the room. I'm excited about tonight. Now, I have to tell you a few things. I have had a full day. Um, I have had a full day taping radio programs with my friend George Saig. And so it's been an incredible day. We taped 3 radio podcast programs for a dear brother in the Valley who runs a podcast show. And then I ended up attending a luncheon to prepare for an upcoming event. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and put on just a quick flash or two of the first upcoming event. Vocab is already been on. He's been promoting this. I'm not going to promote the clip again, but I know that some of you from California are going to be out here, and I am so excited. So I am going to just stick that up there right now. Now, for those who are coming from California, and do let me know that you can honestly hear me. If you've not gotten your advance tickets, go ahead and do that. Vocab probably told you to do that too. And those tickets do include food. And this church feeds us well. So, if you haven't done that, go ahead. Then I'm going to let you know about the exciting stuff that I was preparing for today with a clip. And I'm very excited about this. And so this is in March. So when I finish vocabs, I will be getting ready for my next conference. So let me clip this in here. And start this for you. And this is exciting stuff.
Gadol Elohai Shiru ki gadol Elohai Kol echad yireh ki gadol Elohai.
Don't worry, the screen should put me back on it. There we go. I am really excited. Now, that was last year's flyer. So you see vocab. He's going to be a little less involved this year. He's got some other things. And it's not going to be held in the same place. But that includes outreach, by the way. So I will be doing mosque outreach. I will be doing this conference and the training the week before I will be speaking at. And then I will be taking off to Louisiana the Saturday after I speak. So I'll be doing mosque outreach, speaking that night, and then hopping on a plane on Saturday to go to Louisiana to do my spring tour. But I am really excited about this. I'm excited about the uploaded radio podcast stuff we did. And I'll be telling you more about the March conference. But I just wanted to let you know. You may think it's strange, but the objections I'll be dealing with are around the Trinity, and they're the same objections that Jewish people have. They're worded a little differently, but the issues I'll be dealing with are issues that I would be dealing with differently, but very related to objections I might get from a religious or secular Jew, depending on the objection. And so I feel it is perfectly acceptable apologetics. Hey, um, I know that these things need to be answered. I know they need to be answered well from the scripture. And I know that these things are mental roadblocks that are causing some not to consider the gospel who desperately need to. And so, uh, you know, I am really excited about all that. Well, that's the stuff that I needed to share. We need to get into the PowerPoint tonight, but I just couldn't help sharing because there's been a full day of preparation for March already. And by the way, um, I will let you know that as those podcast radio uh, broadcasts can be done, those can become premieres. And so I will be looking forward to sharing some of that material with you. Meanwhile, you need to turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 7, or you can turn your cell phones to Matthew chapter 7. And I do appreciate the prayers. So thank you out there. I've already seen them. Uh, and so I am really pleased with that. Um, Someone said to me, who do you want to witness to? And, one of my comments was, who don't I want to witness to? Uh, you know, who don't I want to share the gospel with? And I couldn't think of any group of people that I don't want to hear about Jesus. So take that as you will. We're switching to our PowerPoint. There we go. I was able to make this a little bigger and change the style of the font. Windows only goes so far. I've discovered you can only have so many windows on Windows. And you can only have so many windows a certain size in a certain position on the screen in Windows. And so I'm still working on that. We ended up talking about asking, seeking, and knocking. Today we're going to look at some other stuff. Okay? And really, verse 12 is connected to the keeping, persevering prayer. But really, verse 12 really doesn't fit in with that at first glance. So let's talk about the background of those sections and see how they fit together. If I've not had a chance to wave, that's because I'm kind of busy moving and switching windows around. So I absolutely love you guys being here. I'm not ignoring you. I just am a lousy typist. And so with one hand on the mouse and the other hand dealing with the PowerPoint, I haven't figured out what to do with the third hand. I'm being funny. I only have two hands. So let's start looking at this. Now, really, when I look at this, I consider verse 12 a pericope sort of in itself. Actually, I look at it in terms of kind of the tie-in between, you have a therefore, but we have to figure out what the therefore is there for and how it ties in. So I'm looking at a section. I'm going to treat verse 12 as a little pericope in itself and give you some background on that. Now, various people might disagree about whether I should indeed tie it more closely to what comes before or what comes after. These are interpretive questions that people face. Okay? And so, I have to do a quick hi. Because I saw somebody. It's funny. Sometimes I wonder how the little icons are created with your names. But it's probably based on pictures that already exist, little avatars that are already there. Okay. Whatever you want men to do to you, do to them also, for this is the law and prophets. And I call this really, Jesus is giving the spirit of the Torah, and we've talked about that. But let's talk about the background and the therefore. Now, whenever you see a therefore, you got to figure out what it's there for, but it's not always real obvious. Why did I say it's therefore? Now, some of you might have since, some of you might have so in your English Bible. Soon is the Greek word, and you'll notice it is translated so, but it's so as a logical connective. And so that's why your English translators translated it therefore, because we use the word so, like so that, uh, and then we also use it in, our English is a little nuanced here. And so what your English translators wanted to do is they wanted you to get the idea of a logical connective. And so they picked the word that we usually would use, therefore. And it's not wrong, but it is used as then 263 times, so 197, therefore 263, 18 times is and, 11 times is now, 9 times is wherefore. So it has a range of meanings, and that's just because of the Greek and the English. Okay? Therefore is best with soon. Now, the question is, why is the therefore therefore? And so I'm trying to make the connection. Well, the therefore isn't about prayer, because Jesus says, whatever you want men to do to you, do therefore do to them. So it's about your conduct, not about you beseeching God. So you might say, well, now wait a minute. Is this a problem? No, it's not a problem. The therefore ties back to God's generous nature. So Jesus is talking about petitionary prayer, okay? And he makes the point that even in our fallen state, we would not treat our son a certain way. And our God is that much better than that. He's that much greater. He's that much morally more magnificent. And so based on God's moral magnificence, Jesus is going to lay down the spirit of Torah, which is to love God and love your neighbor. So he then jumps to that. So the therefore is therefore not in terms of the prayer, but in terms of the character of God that gives us the basis for prayer. So you might think therefore, but that's why I have a little trouble with this as a pericope, because I almost want to make it its own thing, because he's giving a maxim here, but the tie-in is God's character. So pray in light of God's character, but now we're going to be told in terms of acting, in terms of God's character. And so now we start to get into this. I talked about class conditions. There is no guarantee in this verse that what men will do for you will be what you want. And that's why I stuck that up there. Men will do things and people will do things to you that you don't want morally if you're imitating God to do back to them. So in other words, it's not a tit for tat. Therefore, whatever you want men to do for you, guaranteed that they will do that, do also for them. And that's why the use of this type of condition. Okay? Whenever a third-class condition is used, the idea is it's still likely, but it might not happen. Okay? So we used to talk to our kids and we say, okay, we plan to take you to a certain place, but just be aware that might not happen. And so that's the type of condition. And so the idea here is kind of, Jesus isn't guaranteeing that what you want men to do to you, will end up happening. But your desire for men to treat you well becomes a way of measuring whether you are treating them in a positive way. In other words, how do I practically discern how I should treat other people? Well, I discern it in terms of, look, I would not want harmful things done to me. I would want good things done to me. And so, even though I'm not certain good things will be done to me always, whatever you want men to do to you, um, the fact that that gives you a way of knowing what good things you should probably do for other people. Okay. And so that's why I did the third class. I don't wanted you to see what it looks like, by the way. Um, and so that's what the Greek looks like. The second word there, and I don't know if you can see it because Greek reads the same as English, is what you call the subjunctive mood, and that's just an, and it's not translatable. So your translators just have to pay attention to it. Jesus isn't guaranteeing good treatment in this world, and that's why I'm doing this. Okay. Um, and so there's, not a guarantee as to how we'll be treated, but the way we would like to be treated does tell us something. So let me give you the background of this. Now, this may be a little hard to see. Oh, Isadora Singer, kind of writes small. What can I say? So I'm going to see kind of how this looks as I expand it out. Oh, look at that. I can go ahead and make that a little bigger. Folks, again, the PowerPoint's available. There just was a lot of ground to cover here, and that's why I sometimes read things too. It's not because, I don't want you to read it. It's more because I realize that because it's originating from my computer screen, it's going to look a little better. Okay? What I want you to understand here is that there's a background to what Jesus is saying. And there's a reason, and there's some stuff going on here. Okay? Now, notice this, okay? Now, this is a conversation where Isadora Singer is talking about Matthew 5:43, and we covered that. You've heard it said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies. There was a discussion in Judaism about the treatment of Gentiles, non-Jewish folks. And so there was a lot in Jewish literature about the treatment of other people and certain classes of other people, and what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do. And so he's pointing this out, and he's saying, given that there was some material in the sages, okay, particularly around certain rabbinical schools. In fact, one guy feels that this is very political language, given that there were zealots around in certain groups that were not well thought of. Okay? In fact, you had disciples of one school that tended to think in terms of love the students of the law, but hate the common people. Ignoramuses is haaretz. Remember, the Pharisees thought fairly lowly of the common person who was not as educated. Then there was a discussion about, later on, hating certain groups of people that were regarded as heretics. Okay? It's against the exclusivity principle that appears in the teachings of certain rabbinical schools at the time, and the inter-school or sectarian battling that was going on at that time, that Jesus ends up really kind of bringing this home as far as what the standard is. Against this exclusive principle, Isadora Singer notes, Jesus asserted the principle of brotherly love by applying the liberal school of Hillel to all men. Indeed, the Talmud insists that with the reference to Leviticus 19:18, that's love your enemy as yourself, even the criminal at the time of execution should be treated with a certain amount of tenderness, and he quotes Sanhedrin 45a. Now, what I'm doing is, this is not out of a vacuum. In the discussion of what people I have to love and what people I don't have to love, Jesus is laying this down. He mentions it in Matthew 5. He's going to mention it again here. And so this is coming up yet again. And so Jesus lays this standard. Now, what you need to know is that a similar standard did exist, but Jesus doesn't do it the way the standard was. Okay? And so I want to make kind of clear here. Isidore Singer again, Hillel took the biblical command in this universal spirit and responded to the heathen who requested him to tell the law while standing before him on one foot. What is hateful to thee, thou shalt not do to thy neighbor. This is the whole of the law, the rest is commentary. Now understand what's going on here. Hillel and Shammai were the two big rabbinical schools. They were the earliest material that ended up in the Talmud. They were of the earliest material that ended up in the Talmud. And so a non-Jewish person came to Hillel and said, what must I do to convert? And so in this discussion, he requested him to tell all of the law while standing there on one foot. They bantered back and forth as to what conversion would take. And Hillel summarized all of Torah in this sort of commandment. What is hurtful to thee, do not do to thy neighbor. The rest of the whole law, this is the whole law, the rest is commentary. Now understand how radical this is. First of all, contrary to the rabbinical authorities of today, Hillel summarized the entire Torah with loving your neighbor. Now he was assuming love for God. Don't think he was leaving that out. But he was virtually premising the whole Torah in terms of the great two commandments. Jesus does much the same thing, but notice the way Hillel does it. What is hateful to you, do not do to another. So Hillel puts it in the negative. Okay, figure out what's nasty and don't do it to anyone else. Jesus puts it in the positive. Okay, whatever you desire someone to do for you, whatever you would consider to be a loving act, do for them. So Jesus turns it and puts it in the positive instead of the negative. Now, why is that really useful? Because Hillel's dictum only tells me to avoid doing what is hateful to my neighbor. So the focus then is on avoiding negative behavior towards your neighbor, which may cause you to do some positive things. Jesus's emphasis is not on avoiding negative behavior. Jesus's emphasis is you figuring out what you should do rather than figuring out what you should do by figuring out what you should avoid. So Jesus just puts it in the positive right from the get-go. Now, why does this work? Because my neighbor is an image bearer and I'm an image bearer. Okay? And so I can know that what I, as an image bearer of the Creator, would not like, another image bearer, even though they're fallen, of the same Creator, thus having an emotional nature and a spiritual nature, might not take kindly to either. And so that's what Jesus does. But there's a whole background around this that's going on that cannot be ignored. And so Jesus really is responding to a rabbinical school in his day and also some of the intersectarian stuff and questioning that was happening. All right? 4. We usually understand 4 the same way, but what I want you to see is that in the Greek, 4 is always a marker of cause or reason between two events. All right? There we go. That should help. And so that's why that's there. Now, that's very important. And by the way, the rabbis often discussed how many commandments do I need to keep? What is the greatest commandment? They're always having this discussion about what the greatest commandment is. Look, if you have 613 and then the rabbis add another 300, okay? or even another 600. How many of us can keep track of 600 or 1,000 discrete commands on a daily basis? And so Jesus ends up making this statement. Now, this is the key to understanding, in a sense, how the Old Testament and New Testament fit together. By the way, I was sitting with a brother during the radio episode, and a lot of my friends who go out use a certain style of evangelism. We ask somebody if they've ever stolen, if they've ever lusted. That makes you a lustful stealer. And I'm not going to knock that. But, a lot of times we're so anxious to get unbelievers caught in the sense of we want to show them their need, but we often want to show them their need in terms of what they do. What happens if I show them their need in terms of what they don't do? James says, whoever knows what good to do and does not do it, it is sin. And I like to point that out because people are always ready to defend what they do, but are they ready to defend what they don't do? And so I think that's kind of worthwhile sometimes to turn the tables on somebody and say, look, did you know one thing that you should have done that would have been the right thing to do, the good thing to do, and you should have done it and you didn't do it? And they'll usually, if they're honest, I can usually, yeah, I knew something I should have done that would have been a good thing to do. Good. I don't have to tell you what sin is. You just told yourself, because whoever knows what good to do and does not do it, it is sin. Now, if they want to argue that it's not sin, if I ended up seeing your wallet stolen and I didn't let you know and I didn't turn the person in, would you feel okay about that? So I think people are very used to defending their behavior, but what they're not used to is defending their omissions. And believe me, we fail to do hundreds of good things that we know we should do. They're inconvenient. They came at a bad time. Maybe we just didn't plain feel like it. And so that's a whole other discussion. But do know that there's such a thing as a sin of omission. It's not only what we commit, it's what we omit. Beyond that, if the two great commandments are to love God, then anything that I do positively or negatively that does not include the love of God is automatically suspect. The one lady we heard on the last broadcast, what she didn't include in her list of good things, the Lord with saving the whales and saving the seals? She didn't include loving God. None of her list of good things included God. They were taking care of family, taking care of my community, taking care of the earth. How about loving God? How about caring what God thinks? In fact, the rabbis are interesting. They say the love for God comes first because if you don't love God, James says the same thing. Where do you think this discussion was going on in James's day? They say the first commandment is, I am the Lord thy God who brought you out of the land of Egypt in the 10 Commandments. And the reason they say that is because if you don't believe essentially in God, you have no basis for the other 9. And Dennis Pranger will make the same comment. Okay, so my comment back to her is, your atheist friends may do better than your Christians, but they have less reason to. Your Christians have the right reason for doing the right thing. Your atheist friends have the wrong reason for doing the right thing, or a defective reason for doing the right thing, at best. Okay. Now Jesus is going to contrast the two ways. Okay? Now, where did he get the two ways from? Okay, let's start with the verses. Okay, we're 13 and 14. Now, this really presents another pericope. So 12 can kind of stand on its own, but it's sort of a pivot based on God's nature. And then we get through his commands in 13. Now, 13 all the way and 14 are another pericope. And there are these little pericopes here, these little sections. And so he's going to contrast the narrow way with the wide way. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Understand the word narrow in Greek can have the idea of compressed, like you're trying to get a wagon train through a narrow ravine. Okay? Broad has the idea of spacious. And so Jesus is going to contrast the two gates. But understand the background of this again. Is there a background to this discussion or this picture of ways and gates? Understand that the figure of the two ways was in wide circulation in Jewish and Christian writings. Now, some of these writings are a little later, but in Deuteronomy, you have the mention of a choice between life and death. Therefore, choose life. In other words, two paths are put before you. Two ways exist. So this idea of two paths or two ways existed. Jeremiah 28, and I'm just quickly going to try to turn there. It's always a dangerous thing to do when you have a camera on you, right? Is to try and turn there. But it's kind of important that I go ahead to the actual verse. And again, I have to remember that my Bible order is your Bible order now, but was not always, because the Jewish Bible has Jeremiah in a different location. So I do have to use tabs. Not on the New Testament, on the Old Testament. So I'm turning to Jeremiah, and let's discuss this sort of picture of two ways, which was widely circulated and was sort of understood as a kind of a word picture. Okay? And I'm going to 8 of Jeremiah 21. Now you say to the people, thus says the Lord, behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. See that? The way of life and the way of death, the figure of two ways. So this figure was very common. It was picked up from the prophets, and then it later finds its way into pseudepigrapha and later writings and into the Christian writings. So you have those intertestamental writings picking up on it, and then the Didache, which was an early Christian writing, picks up on it. And so Jesus is using a common word picture that they could understand. And I have Deuteronomy. There's Deuteronomy. See, I actually had them in the slides. So if you didn't hear me read them, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today. I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that you and your descendants may live. Two ways. I set before you life and death. I set before you two ways. Choose life. This is where it appears in the Apostolic Fathers. Now remember, it appears Jesus then takes this word picture and uses it. The Apostolic or early Christian writers who are writing end up taking the same language which Jesus spoke, and they end up using it in their stuff. Let us not depart to another knowledge and teaching. There are two ways of teaching and authority, one light, one darkness. There is a great difference between the two ways. For over the one are appointed light-bringing angels of God, and over the other angels of Satan. One is from the Lord from eternity and from all ages. The other is the ruler of the present time of lawlessness. This is out of the Apostolic Fathers. So Jesus uses a word picture that existed and was widely circulated, and then the Apostolic Fathers end up using this same word picture over and over again. So there's a real background to this, and then there's a real carryover that goes on. But what's a way? What do we mean? We don't use it the same way. Understand that there was a time when the early believers were called the way, because Jesus said, I am the way. It could be used in terms of sections of people's lives individual sections of a human life. I am in the way of starting to move towards being more elderly. Okay, it could be used in terms of walk or conduct. Now, that's the sort of word picture that you have here. Way of life. When you think way of life, manner of conduct. The word walk has to do with one's conduct, how one conducts themselves. Your locomotion, your movement was considered a picture of how you conduct yourself. And so this figure came into use. Was Jesus exclusive? We talked about this a little bit. I like to point out, did Jesus say only certain people should come to him? No. And this is a verse we used before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but do understand that Jesus is pointing out there are two ways. Enter by the narrow gate. That means there must be a broad gate. Where's the broad gate way? Well, the broad gate is the way of death. And the narrow gate is the way of life. You know, for a postmodern, well, doesn't that seem kind of exclusive? I mean, don't all ways lead to the same God? Don't all ways lead to heaven? No, there are two gates. There are two entrances to two different ways being pictured here back in Matthew. And they have different results and different they have different destinations, shall we say. One leads to destruction. One leads to blessedness. The invitation to the narrow way is offered broadly, but the way that is being offered is narrow. So, Jesus had a specific mission. Now remember the audience he's talking to. This is very interesting. Up in Matthew 7, all the way through, a little further, you know, where Jesus is talking about the cost of discipleship and Lord of the Sabbath, he's talking to an entirely Jewish audience. Okay? Jesus' mission is broader, but at this point, he makes the statement up in Matthew 15:24 that he was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, why? Because there was something that needed to be done before certain other things could happen. The kingdom had to be offered to Israel because Israel has a role to play. And so Jesus, in conformity to Israel's role, offered and talked to very Jewish disciples through here, giving his new Torah. The community's going to grow. Paul spends a lot of time in Romans 11 on this. What's a nice guy like Paul doing reaching non-Jewish folks? Well, I speak to you Gentiles as much as I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. By the way, he calls himself the apostle to the Gentiles and says Peter was sent to the Jews. I don't know how Roman Catholics square that. Why don't they say Paul was the head of the church? It was Paul that was sent to the Gentiles. It was Peter that was sent to the Jews. The Catholic Church is not Israel. So why would you assume that the apostle to the Jews would be head of the Roman Catholic Church? Kind of strange. I magnify my industry if I may provoke to jealousy some of my own flesh and save some of them. For if they're being cast away, and that's Israel's present rejection, by the way, as a corporate people, we're not talking about Jewish people predominantly being believers in Messiah. What will their acceptance of Jesus be but life from the dead? And actually, that life from the dead is a reference to the coming of the kingdom in Daniel and other places where there'll be a resurrection of the just before the kingdom. So the kingdom is connected. And so the kingdom being initiated on earth, Israel had a role to play in that. Okay? What's the narrow way? How do I find it? Well, Jesus told me. The way is not just a series of things I do. The way is a person, isn't it? I am the way. Okay, Jesus and acceptance of him is the way. I have a little track. I can't show you one right now. It's almost too bad. I almost have one right around. It says the way of righteousness, and then down is transliterated Hebrew, derech tzaddik. And I think I have it a little bit more nuanced to fit the grammar. And then I have 3 basic points. Um, Redemption is by blood, by faith, and through Messiah. It's business card size. It's a gospel tool. Um, Maybe sometime I can offer 100-pack of those, but 3 basic verses. I wanted something the size of a business card that I could get 3 basic gospel points on, because everybody in New York was taking our tracts and throwing them on the subway floor. And I thought, wow. And one of their excuses was, yeah, I don't have a place to put this. Well, did you get my card? And it would say Derech Tzaddik, or it would, more grammatically, the way of righteousness. And I had those 3 points. I figured if I could get those 3 points going and get a conversation going, I had something. But I got 3 scriptural points related to the gospel that I could get through to these guys. I haven't used them as much as I'd like to. Okay, I'm doing this for a reason. We don't like the idea that there's only one way to God in a postmodern secular society. Okay? That is so offensive to your average, very, very secular American. Where's the freedom in that? Where's that whole thing? And so Jesus is saying something. He's saying something that rankles us when he gives this illustration. Now, to a Jewish audience, again, the idea of 2 ways was not so strange. But to an American audience, this is a little stranger. What does this mean for evangelism? I really want to take a minute or two. People get so bothered when people just don't fall down and get saved the first time they hear the gospel. By the way, I'm going to let you know a secret. The gospel was shared a whole lot with me before. Okay? And so, as I'm talking about this, let's think about this. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many are those who go in by it. Because the narrow is the gate, and difficult, see, narrow having the idea of compressed. That's why the New King James does that, and the NIV might do that. Difficult is the way to life, and there are few that find it. How many find the broad way? Many. How many find the narrow way? Few. What does that tell me? Most people are going to reject the gospel. Well, why? Because I know that few are those that find it. I think we need to adjust our thinking a little bit. Yes, there are times of revival and specific people that God's working with in specific periods in history, such as the Great Awakening, where many came all at once. And God has movements of his spirit. I understand that. I'm not taking away from that. During the 1960s, the Jesus movement was an incredible thing. But here's the thing. Even with like the parable of the soils, we need to get ready to work hard to get a little instead of working very lightly and expecting a lot. And I think all too often we get too easily discouraged, and we also get too results oriented. And so, I heard somebody described, I put up a Facebook post, and I hope it wasn't offensive, but I was musing. I heard an evangelist described as somebody with itchy feet that sees people get saved. I'm not certain that that's the only style or type or box that an evangelist can fit into. And so what I'd like to say, and I advocate tonight, is that we need to be willing to work hard even if we don't see great results. We need to be like Hudson Taylor and William Carey. I love William Carey. This one thing I can do for God, I can plod. Hudson Taylor, who ended up creating a missions organization, but saw very few converts when he was there. We need to be those type of individuals that are willing to work for the Lord without expecting a grocery basket worth of fruit right at the beginning. I know this stuff's practical. The enter, by the way, is a command. You say it's nice if you enter by the narrow gate. It's a command. If you want to see life, you have to enter by the narrow gate. It's the only way. By the way, the idea of difficult there, I'm kind of glad that the New King James does that. I love the words of G.K. Chesterton. It is not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting. It is that Christianity is hard. I got to remember the exact quote. Let's see if I can get it up to. It's not that Christianity is been tried and found wanting. It's that Christianity has been found difficult and left untried. That's G.K. Chesterton, and it's one of my favorite quotes from Chesterton. You want to have life. You want to have. Notice that it's life that's talked about. You want to have blessedness, then you must enter by the narrow gate. And by the way, this type of command in the aorist looks at the action as a whole without discussing repetition or duration. There's nothing about how long it takes or how long you have to enter by the narrow gate or that you have to enter by the narrow gate 50 or 60 times. What it looks at is you just need to enter. Hard works. Difficult, hard. The Greek word again has the idea of trying to get, a whole bunch of cattle through a narrow sort of thing, or a bunch of sheep near a narrow chasm. The idea of compressed, difficult, tight. If we say that, I'm in a tight place right now, it's that sort of picture. Well, what's a hindrance to the way? There are a lot of hindrances, aren't there? But Jesus is going to talk about one hindrance in particular, the false teacher or false prophet. I'm going to get into this pericope just a little bit because this is the last pericope of tonight. Beware false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruit. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, and every bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree can't bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by your fruits you will know them. Now, beware is a command. Why would Jesus have to command his disciples to beware? The Hebrew is taken from the idea of guard or shamer. The Greek isn't, but if you look at it, the idea of being on guard or watching or bewaring is related through the Septuagint to the same sort of Greek word you have there. Okay? Because there are two great dangers. There is danger from without, and there is danger from within. And the great danger sometimes is from within. Acts 20:29 through 30. Okay? Danger from without and from within. Know this, Paul says, speaking of his leaving the elders at Ephesus. After my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and also among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things, to draw away the disciples after themselves. So there is a danger. There are people saying things that are bad, that are just unhealthy things in terms of scriptural truth and a Christian worldview. And so Jesus knows full well that where the truth is, the counterfeit will come. Well, how do I recognize them? Because Jesus points to a very, very simple principle. Consistent harmful results may indicate a harmful source. If I keep eating food that's been in my refrigerator for 3 months and it doesn't look so good and it don't smell so good, every time I eat that food I get a stomach ache, it might just be the food. And there are, he uses agricultural things. Look, folks, you know that the nature of the tree affects the fruit. And so if you have a good source, you're going to get pretty good fruit. And if you have a bad source, you're going to get bad fruit. And so he's using a very sort of common language with common people. By the way, notice Jesus taught to the common people and he used very common language. A good source in itself will, a good source will demonstrate itself. There's a moral cause and effect in the universe. All right. Now, having said that, does that mean your pastor has to be a perfect human being to be a good pastor? No. Okay. Jesus is saying corrupt teaching will eventually demonstrate itself, that there's a moral cause and effect in the universe, and corrupt teaching will demonstrate itself. Pay attention to the moral cause and effect. What is this causing people to do and to think and to live? All right? What is this producing as an effect? And so, no, Jesus is not saying you'll know them by their fruits in terms of, and the sinless guy you can listen to, because then I have to leave the room. All right? What Jesus is saying is, look at the general things that they're advocating as a mode of conduct by their fruits. What are they producing? What is being produced through their teaching? How does their teaching play out in its moral effects and its spiritual effects? And I have to be careful, but there are views out there like the New Apostolic Reformation that is producing terrible fruit. All right. What fruit is produced? And so Jesus is telling them, look at the cause and effect. If their teaching is producing rotten apples, then it's possible you then can discern the tree is not good. But I want to be careful because your pastors and your missionaries and your workers, they live under such a fishbowl. And I've seen terrible things done to them in the name of pointing something out. The individuals will remain, but I do remember an incident when I was in missions uh, where um, where an individual challenged the fact that we had videos that we had rented, which, by the way, he should have had no access to that information at all. And what he didn't know was that my kids had received birthday money as a gift. Uh, as missionary kids, somebody cared about them enough to send them some birthday money. And there was a movie that they hadn't seen that they wanted to see. You can discuss whether you allow for movies or not. That's a whole other subject. The point was, we were not getting sinks with gold stuff. My kids were made to feel bad about something because somebody had a legalistic expectation of what my fruit should look like. So I'm saying be careful. Okay, there's gross sin, there's moral effects of someone's teaching, and then there's people that are they're not being fruit inspectors, they're being nitpickers. And so Jesus is talking about gross moral effects here. Marcion's effects on the church, morally. Gnosticism's effect on the church and the faith. And so we're to be fruit inspectors, but that fruit is distinct moral fruit, and it's distinct doctrinal fruit in how the gospel and other key doctrines are affected. It is not someone doesn't do something the same way I do. I want to bring balance to this because some people are just really love to inspect the fruit on the aisle, but they don't necessarily have real good standards. Okay. Yep, someone clarified, and I appreciate the clarification. Yes. Look, you will know. You will know when it's gross fruit. And you go ahead and you look. I'm running danger here, all right? But let me say something. I don't think forced celibacy of Catholic priests has worked well when I look at the fruit. The fruit seems to not be so good. And I don't care what percentage of clergy do things that ought not be discussed in the light of day. I just don't think that's worked well. And so I would say the moral fruit of separating a spiritual calling from family and marriage may not necessarily be really good. So, and I think they're receiving some of the fruit of the idea that somehow celibacy ought to be considered more spiritual than marriage, or that those who are called to serve God are called not to serve God in the context of a marriage or family. And so I think there's some problems there, but that's a modern day example where I see doctrinal, a misunderstanding doctrinally leading to bad doctrinal fruit and then leading to some other fruit. So that's kind of where that's at. I could take a lot of time, but do understand that Jesus is making very clear that you need to be discerning. I think what Jesus is saying, what I'd say about apologetics and everything else, learn to discern. Learn to discern. So, it's been a long evening. If you tuned in late, you missed the big advertisement for what I've been doing today and what will be coming up. So I encourage you, if you missed any part of it, go back. Really kind of excited and glad to have you all with me. Hopefully you got appreciation for the usage of the two ways in Jewish and Christian literature that it existed. It followed from one to the other. The way there is not simply a list of do's and don'ts, but it's a person, and it's the living out of that person's life that is imputed to us. So he lives in us, and we live out the life he has for us. And so the way is a lot better than simply being a little quiz with a bunch of boxes that we check off. And then the danger of false prophets. Learn to discern and look at the ramifications of what's being taught. By the way, Jesus did believe that there'd be teachers and prophets, and he did believe that that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I only say that because some people feel doctrine should be like in the days of the judges, where every man decides what is right in his own eyes. And I don't buy that. Ephesians 4:11 says he gave some to be teachers and evangelists We don't throw away God's good gifts, but we discern what is good and what is evil. So that takes us through, and we'll talk about Jesus's discussion of the fact, again, we touched on it. What is Jesus really looking for? And can we fool ourselves? Can people fool themselves? And then what are we to build our lives on? Then we're going to start getting into the miracle sections. And what is the use of miracles and why Jesus did certain miracles and how to understand it in the context of which miracles he did and where he did them and things of that nature. So, I'm so thrilled that everyone was here. You guys are absolutely wonderful. I was thinking about somebody who's back. Denise, it is great to have you back. So I'm just going to say, great. You know, I love it when people come visit and then they hang out with us and they stay and they come back again. That's just so exciting to me. To see God just draw people to these and to look at them, but also to become part of the dialogue. And so that's so exciting. Well, I'm going to probably settle in after a bunch of radio shows and stuff tonight. And we will be back. Look for the next topic. Again, I'll be looking at the website. And the website has the upcoming topics. And I can't quite think where we are at this exact moment. It's getting a little fuzzy here. But I'll be posting that soon. And maybe next week I can give you a rundown of some of the topics. And then sometime in the near future, I will be doing a Jeff's Musing on our Facebook page. And I will post that for patrons. But if you ever want to find the stuff and you're not supporting us through that, because some people support us through Chosen People Ministries, please, feel free. I'm posting stuff there so that both, you have access, because I want people to have the access to the musings and everything else. I'm going to go ahead, stick that up. You guys are wonderful. We do things through Chosen People. We do things through Patreon. And so I'm excited, and we've got great things coming up. And I'll just put that up, put the music down. Just in the background there. Thank you, no matter how you support this work, from the going out and doing street ministry to the YouTube.